reason. You know, the US sent 250,000 troops to Iraq back in 2003, which is a huge amount of resources to do. They did that with the backing, not just of the oil industry, but of the whole of, essentially, US business, because those soldiers were doing a job for the corporations. Yeah. And the same here. You know, these people, these police that have been keeping you and all of us off the square and intimidating people and arresting people and harassing people, it costs a lot of money. And it actually causes some damage to the capitalists to do that in a certain sense. They do it for a reason. These organisations, both at home and abroad, the state, all the institutions of the state, are there to make the world safe for capitalist accumulation, for the capitalist system, and they're a very, very important part of that process, both against us and also against other states. One of the reason they're fighting these wars is not just to stop democracy developing, although that is absolutely crucial. It's also to keep China out of the Middle East and to keep Chinese capital out of Africa. So they play those roles both in terms of competition and in terms of dissent. Now, you know, if we could take apart the state in Britain, if we could stop the state functioning, if we could create a mutiny in the army, if we could create demoralisation in the police so it fell apart, we would be in a situation then to take on the corporations and they wouldn't have any defences left. You know, they wouldn't be able to stop us occupying the whole of the city. And so all these institutions, including Parliament and the media, these political institutions, they are absolutely crucial to the functioning of the system. That doesn't mean that anti-corporate activity isn't important. It is important. But it does mean that in the end of the day, the truth is, if we're going to get a society, if we're going to move towards a situation where the people actually start to discipline the corporations, take them apart, democratise them, we're going to have to deal with the state. There's no way round it. It won't just dissolve. So therefore, you know, the political action on all different fronts is a crucial part of what we do. So I think it's got to be a combination of, yes, the anti-corporate work, but also recognising that we need to strategise. We have to create a movement that is strong enough to demoralise the police. That's the truth. You know, I remember, I'll just finish on this, just to illustrate the fact that this is not a pipe dream. I remember just one example that really burnt into my mind because I watched it on TV in Serbia back in, when was it, 1990, when did Milosevic fall? Was it 98, 99?
99, I think.
99, this dictator, that's right. Now, this dictator, very right-wing, horrible dictator in Serbia, he wasn't defeated and brought down actually by bombing. He was brought down by a combination of a massive miners' strike and lots of strike action and a social movement that was so big and powerful that they surrounded Parliament with millions, and literally you could see there were these pictures on TV which should be, you know, they should be like taught to every school kid and every university student. They should be shown these. The police were sort of defending Parliament, and there was a certain point at which some of them started to disappear, and they went round the back and they took off their uniforms and they just ran because they were confronted with a movement that they knew it was their brothers and sisters and mothers and daughters on the protest, but they also knew that a social movement with enough weight, with the backing of the unions and the workers, had been created, which was so big that they couldn't, force wasn't going to be able to stop it. And that is the kind of movement we have to create, because we do have to take apart the institutions of the state. I don't know if that's a bit off.
No, because I didn't answer that question at all.
Sorry, when was that?
99, 1999. You should check it out. It's probably on YouTube. I've never checked it on YouTube, actually. I'm sure obviously there will be stuff. But it's absolutely brilliant footage of they're literally taking off their uniforms and just like running, you know.
Well, similar things happened early on during the Egyptian Revolution.
That's true, actually.
Where there were various points, like at one point, there was a, they're not called battalions because they're police, and I don't know how big, but it was basically this big group of hundreds of police marching towards us, and they all dropped their batons and went, and just ran away. And that was in 2011 in Egypt. Sadly, they then sent another group of 1,000 police who didn't drop their batons and were probably better paid and stayed loyal. So, yeah, it wasn't, you need to go further.
Could you say a bit more What about who is keeping the Chinese out of the Middle East? No, keeping the Chinese out of Africa, you said. How does that work? Who's keeping the Chinese out of Africa? Could you say a bit more about that, please?
Do you want to say stuff? I can say stuff as well.
Or should we see if there's anyone else wants to say?
Here's a question for you. Why are the police here? Why is peaceful protest not allowed? Why?
It's not quite what this talk is about. This talk's about a little bit, yeah. It's not quite the right place to talk about this. No, it's not about the film. It's just about.
Well, we can throw stuff in if there's no other.
We can start another discussion.
She says, why are the police here? And I'm like, I don't know.
We can answer that as well.
I mean, I'm not an expert on Africa, but if you look at the chronological sequence of wars, and I don't want to go back too far, but if you go back to Libya, which was probably the critical war for Africa, because if you may recall, in 2009, Tony Blair was having a love-in with Gaddafi, and John McCain also went over there promising arms to Gaddafi. Now, the reason he was promising arms was to put down an uprising in Benghazi, an uprising apparently of Al-Qaeda. So hold that thought in your mind. 2009, Al-Qaeda uprising in Benghazi. In the meantime, and I should tell you a bit about Libya. Libya was one of the richest countries in Africa. It had an egalitarian society, full health care, women's rights, education. It was a functioning state.
When?
This was prior to the war. It was a functioning state. Then,
Libya had women's rights.
yeah, indeed. Much more so than any other Arab nation such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and all these others. It then happened that Gaddafi was trying to form an African alliance, a currency, a trading bloc, similar to the EU. And at the base of that, he was proposing a common currency, the gold dinar. Now, behind all these wars is the need to prop up the US dollar, because there was an agreement made between Nixon when he took the dollar off the gold standard that oil would always be traded in dollars. And the quid pro quo for that was to back the Al Saud house in Saudi Arabia. So the military might of America guarantees the existence of Al Saud in Saudi Arabia. So essentially, in proposing an alternative currency, in the same way that Saddam Hussein threatened to trade oil in euros, was going to threaten dollar hegemony. And therefore, that and a combination of other reasons, Gaddafi had to go. And the other reason was that he was the obstacle to AFRICOM. Now, AFRICOM is the US command center for Africa. And basically, what we've seen since Gaddafi's fall is Africa populated with US troops under various excuses. But it was the removal of Gaddafi that allowed that to happen, because he was one of the blocks to the move into Africa. Now, the Chinese in this time have been investing in Africa. They've been investing in infrastructure. They haven't been doing it militarily, but they have been exploiting the resources of the country, and one has views on that as to whether that's a good or bad thing. But clearly that was not to be tolerated by the ruling elites who, acting through the American empire, wanted to get their sticky hands on everything African. And therefore, Gaddafi had to go. That was the reason. It was nothing to do with responsibility to protect. It's because the ruling elite have control of the UN, they have control of the EU, and they have control of the American state, they have control of the British state, and they have control of the media. So using a combination of all these, they orchestrated public opinion and the UN to permit the responsibility to protect resolution. Now, China and Russia went along with it, and I think they very much regret it, because basically it has opened the door to China losing a lot of its interests in Libya specifically, but more generally across Africa. And clearly Russia is now the target for the next assault through Ukraine. And I don't know whether one wants to go on to this, but I think if one's talking about war, you cannot study war of the wars in the 21st century without looking at 9/11. And unless one is prepared to question the official story of 9/11, which doesn't withhold any cursory scrutiny, not least because Building 7 came down without an aeroplane hitting it at free fall speed, unless you question 9/11, you cannot make sense of what's going on in the world. And 9/11 actually has its origins in the 1990s. In the 1990s, there was a document prepared amongst what are called the neocons, which includes people like Wolfowitz, Ronald Pearl, and others, who produced the Project for the New American Century. And this was a plan for global domination by America. Now, if people don't want me to discuss this, I'm happy to stop. So
I just wanted to try and get more discussion going.